Up to this point, we've explored various individual factors that contribute to aggression. However, the real world is rarely so simple. People are exposed to multiple influences simultaneously, and to truly understand and predict aggressive behavior, we need to consider how these factors combine and interact. And so, this final section bridges the gap between the individual effects we've discussed and the broader theoretical models, providing a more integrated perspective with the eventual goal to reduce violence. Now, to fully comprehend aggression, it's necessary to integrate various aggression related factors into current theories. But first, I encourage you to take a look at this clip that discusses the nature of human aggression. And so, this clip is titled, Are Humans Naturally Violent? And of course, it'll leave you to answer questions, right? Is it yes? Is it no? Are humans naturally prone to disposition? Maybe, but even if we are, there are steps that can be taken to minimize it. Now, the risk and resilience model adapted from the medical field highlights the likelihood of aggression increases with the number of risk factors present. And so this approach is particularly insightful when applied to aggression and violence, as it helps predict both the likelihood of being a perpetrator and a victim. And so the model considers a combination of multiple risk and protective factors that interact dynamically. And these factors collectively influence the probability of aggressive behavior and victimization. So let's analyze them independently. The risk factors, as what we have been previously discussing, are referred to as the causes, though we use that word rather sparingly, as the language increasing the likelihood is more accurate. So, some of the most common risk factors for aggression include those individual personal traits. For instance, some people are more prone to aggression than others. Several psychological processes can contribute to aggression, such as anger, frustration, and impulsivity. And this is due in part to genetic factors, but environmental factors also influence it. Environmental risk factors involve phenomena such as exposure to violence, poverty, and lack of social support. And then there are those situational factors. And so certain situations can trigger aggression, such as when someone is provoked or when they feel threatened. Then there are the resilience factors that protect people from the negative effects of the risk factors. And some of the most common resilience factors for mitigating aggression include the categories under environmental protective factors. And so these can include things like positive role models, right? A supportive family and a safe neighborhood. For instance, people who have strong social ties are less likely to aggress as they have people to turn to for help and support. Situational protective factors involve things like de escalation strategies, conflict resolution skills, and access to mental health resources. These are at many times rooted in privilege and access, they can promote the individual protective factors, right? Such as self control, self esteem, empathy, and problem solving skills, which are all essential for reducing the likelihood of aggressive behavior. For example, people who have positive coping skills are better able to deal with stress and other negative emotions, which can help to reduce aggression. Similarly, personality differences come into play. People who have a high self esteem are less likely to be aggressive, as they're more confident in themselves and less likely to feel threatened by others. And so the risk resilience approach highlights the importance of considering the broader context and the interplay of multiple influences rather than focusing solely on single causes. However, understanding how conflicts can escalate into violence is crucial in maintaining peace and harmony. And so the violence escalation model, VEM, addresses how aggressive interactions can escalate over time, becoming more intense and harmful. And this is a valuable tool that helps identify the stages of conflict, which can be used to develop effective strategies for preventing violence. And this model describes four different stages that lead to violence. And so keep in mind in section one, we talked about that pyramid. However, this could be considered as an enhancement to that. So, stage one is characterized by differences in opinions or beliefs between two or more people. The differences may be minor or major, but it is the first step in escalating conflict. Stage two is contradiction. The difference between two or more people becomes more pronounced, and they may begin to argue or disagree with each other due to anger, frustration, and resentment. During stage three, the conflict between two or more people becomes more polarized as they may begin to see each other as enemies or adversaries. Polarization makes it challenging to resolve the conflict peaceably. And stage four is where the conflict escalates into violence, such as physical, verbal, or emotional. So, violence can cause significant harm to the individuals involved and can have long lasting negative consequences. And so, the violence escalation model provides a dynamic perspective on aggression, focusing on how aggressive interactions unfold and intensify. Understanding this escalation process is crucial for developing effective intervention strategies aimed at interrupting the cycle of violence. And so now that we've built a solid foundation in understanding what aggression is, the theories that explain it, and of course the factors that influence it, we can turn our attention to a critical question. How can we reduce aggression and violence in our society? This is where the application of social psychology becomes paramount. However, the methods we choose to reduce aggression are not ethically neutral. We must carefully consider the potential consequences and moral implications of our interventions. And so, what goes into reducing the effects of risk factors and promoting protective factors? One component may be the reappraisal as a key cognitive strategy for managing aggression. It's about consciously changing how we think about a situation. When faced with a potentially provoking event, our initial reaction might be to assume hostile intent. However, reappraisal encourages us to pause, gather more information, and consider alternative explanations. For example, if someone bumps into us, instead of immediately assuming they did it on purpose, we can consider the possibility that it was an accident due to crowding. And this shift in perspective can significantly reduce feelings of anger and the urge to aggress. We also have to consider personality traits, right? And how they play a role in aggression. Is it possible to model agreeableness? Now, it's one of the big five personality traits is consistently linked to lower levels of aggression. Agreeable individuals are typically cooperative, empathetic, and considerate of others. They tend to avoid conflict and are less likely to interpret situations in a hostile way. And so, this personality trait can act as a protective factor against aggression, making it less likely for individuals to experience the internal states that lead to aggressive behavior. And as we've previously discussed, the hostile attribution bias can significantly contribute to aggression. Therefore, interventions that directly target and reduce this bias can be effective in preventing aggressive behavior. These interventions often involve teaching individuals cognitive and social skills, such as how to accurately read social cues, how to consider alternative explanations for behavior, and how to respond assertively rather than aggressively. For instance, if you've ever taken any classes in K 12 and they were focused on social emotional learning, then you've probably already been exposed to some of this type of training. And so, by changing the way individuals perceive and interpret social interactions, these interventions can help create a less hostile and aggressive environment. And so, by promoting positive psychological protective factors such as the reappraisal, agreeableness, and reducing hostile attributions, aggression and violence can be reduced. And so, as we wrap up section four, we've moved beyond examining individual influences on aggression in isolation. And instead, we focus on how these influences operate in conjunction. So, to truly grasp the complexity of aggression, we need to understand that it's rarely caused by a single factor. The risk and resilience approach is a crucial component here. It underscores the importance of considering the broader context and the cumulative effect of risk factors. As more risk factors accumulate, the likelihood of aggression increases. And we've also explored the violence escalation model, which provides a framework for understanding the dynamic nature of aggressive interactions and how they can intensify over time. And so these integrated perspectives offer a more nuanced understanding of aggression, which is essential for developing more effective prevention and intervention strategies. And to summarize Chapter 9, we've covered several key areas in the study of aggression. We started by defining aggression, emphasizing its intentional nature and distinguishing between physical, verbal, and relational forms. We then explored two major theories: the general aggression model, which explains aggression as a result of interacting personal and situational factors shaped by our thoughts and feelings, and the I3 model, which focuses on interplay of instigation, impulse, and inhibition. A significant portion of the chapter was dedicated to the factors that influence aggression. And we examined how both personal characteristics like narcissism and situational variables such as provocation and exposure to media violence can increase the likelihood of aggressive behavior. We also looked at how risk factor can accumulate to increase the likelihood of aggression and how aggressive interactions can escalate. And finally, we discussed strategies for reducing aggression, including cognitive techniques like reappraisal, personality factors like agreeableness, and of course, interventions aimed at changing hostile attribution biases. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, feel free to discuss these further questions in the comments. What are some of the ethical considerations involved in different aggression reduction strategies? Do you believe the ends always justify the means? How can the principles of the GAM and I3 model be applied to design interventions for specific types of aggression, such as bullying or domestic violence? And third, considering the risk and resilience approach, what are some key protective factors that can be fostered in individuals and communities to reduce the likelihood of aggression? Thank you so much for tuning in.